After the fragmentation of the Mongol Empire, the once unified world system it had created did not simply collapse into chaos. Instead, it transformed into a complex network of successor states, regional powers, and rising civilizations that reshaped Eurasia for centuries. The Mongol world did not end abruptly. It evolved into new political structures that carried both Mongol legacy and local identities. Following the breakup, the four major successor Khanates, the Golden Horde, the Ilkhanate, the Chagatai Khanate, and the Yuan dynasty, initially continued to dominate their respective regions. However, their trajectories quickly diverged due to geography, culture, religion, and internal political instability. In China, the Yuan dynasty maintained control over a highly advanced bureaucratic system. But governing such a densely populated and administratively complex society proved increasingly difficult. The Mongol elite remained ethnically distinct from the Han majority, creating deep political tension. Heavy taxation, corruption, and economic inequality fueled widespread unrest. Over time, these pressures culminated in large-scale rebellions, most notably the rise of the Ming dynasty, which overthrew the Yuan in 1368. This marked the end of Mongol rule in China and the restoration of native Chinese governance. In Persia, the Ilkhanate underwent a profound transformation. Initially destructive, Mongol rule gradually stabilized as the rulers adopted local administrative systems and embraced Islam. The conversion of the Ilkhanate elite reshaped their legitimacy, aligning them with the dominant religious structure of the region. However, internal disputes, economic strain, and succession crises weakened central authority. After the death of strong rulers like Genghis Khan, the state fragmented into smaller competing factions. By the mid-14th century, the Ilkhanate had effectively dissolved, leaving Persia open to regional dynasties and renewed local power struggles. In Central Asia, the Chagatai Khanate persisted longer, but also split into eastern and western branches. The region became a battleground of nomadic and settled influences. Over time, Turkic and Islamic cultural elements became dominant, and the original Mongol identity gradually faded. This transformation eventually contributed to the rise of later Central Asian powers such as the Timurids under Tamerlane, who built a new empire on the ruins of Mongol fragmentation while still invoking Mongol legacy for legitimacy. The Golden Horde in the Western Steppe controlled vast territories stretching into Eastern Europe. At first, it dominated Russian principalities through tribute systems rather than direct occupation. However, over time, internal divisions and economic decline weakened its authority. One by one, Russian states began resisting Mongol control. A key turning point was the rise of the Grand Duchy of Moscow, which gradually unified surrounding territories and reduced Mongol influence. The symbolic decline of Mongol dominance in this region became visible after events like the Battle of Kulikovo in 1380, even though full independence took longer to achieve. Across all successor states, a common pattern emerged. Mongol political structures were powerful in conquest, but fragile in long-term governance. Once unified command disappeared, the empire's military efficiency could not be sustained. Local cultures reasserted themselves, and administrative systems reverted to regional traditions. The Mongols, once rulers of a connected Eurasian system, became absorbed into the very societies they had conquered. Economically, the fragmentation of Mongol rule also had long-term consequences. The previously stable network of trade routes, known as the Pax Mongolica, began to deteriorate. While parts of the Silk Road remained active, political instability increased the risks of long-distance trade. Merchants faced higher taxes, insecurity, and regional conflicts. This contributed to a gradual shift in global trade patterns, eventually encouraging European maritime exploration as an alternative to overland routes. Culturally, however, the Mongol legacy did not disappear. Administrative practices, military tactics, and diplomatic systems influenced many successor states. Even after their political collapse, the Mongols left a lasting imprint on Eurasian governance. In some regions, they accelerated cultural exchange. In others, they reshaped ethnic and religious identities for centuries. In conclusion, after the fragmentation of the Mongol Empire, the world did not return to its previous state. Instead, it entered a new historical phase defined by regionalization, cultural synthesis, and the rise of successor powers. The Mongol Empire ended as a unified structure, but its aftermath reshaped Eurasia into a more complex and multipolar world order. In the 13th century, the Mongol Empire carried out the fastest and most destructive expansion in world history, rapidly becoming a vast power stretching from China to Eastern Europe. Founded by Genghis Khan, this system was built on military discipline, speed, and psychological warfare. However, such an aggressive and expansive structure was not sustainable in the long term. The collapse of the Mongols was not a sudden downfall, but a slow, inevitable, and multi-layered process of disintegration. Their greatest strength, rapid conquest, also laid the foundation for their greatest weakness. Within just a few decades, the empire grew beyond what could realistically be controlled. A military system perfectly suited to the Central Asian steppe proved far less effective in the settled agricultural societies of China or the dense urban centers of the Middle East. As the distance between the central authority and the provinces increased, communication slowed, local governors began acting independently, and logistical networks started to break down. At this point, the Mongols shifted from being an unstoppable conquering force to an overextended empire struggling to govern itself. After the death of Genghis Khan, the system lacked a stable mechanism of succession. Each major ruler's death triggered inevitable power struggles, a problem that became especially evident after the death of Kublai Khan. While the Kurultai system was theoretically structured, in practice, it led to rivalry among members of the ruling family, fragmentation of the army, and the disappearance of a unified strategy. These internal conflicts weakened Mongol military power more than external enemies ever could. Over time, the Mongol Empire could no longer remain unified and split into separate political entities, including the Golden Horde, the Ilkhanate, the Chagatai Khanate, and the Yuan dynasty. This fragmentation was not only political, but also cultural and economic, as each Khanate began prioritizing its own interests rather than maintaining a unified imperial strategy. As a result, the Mongols transitioned from a global superpower into a collection of regional states. Initially, the Mongols preserved their nomadic identity, but over time, they adapted to the cultures of the lands they had conquered. In China, the Yuan dynasty became increasingly Sinicized. In Persia, the Ilkhanate adopted Islam, and in Central Asia, a Turkic-Mongol synthesis emerged. While this adaptation made governance easier in the short term, it gradually eroded the distinct Mongol identity and weakened their traditional military discipline. Later generations of rulers became more bureaucratic than militaristic, and the original warrior ethos faded. At the same time, the Mongols lost their decisive military edge as their enemies learned and adapted to their tactics. Fortifications improved, armies became more disciplined, and new technologies began to emerge. A critical turning point was the Battle of Ain Jalut, where the Mamluk Sultanate proved that the Mongols could be defeated, shattering their aura of invincibility. From that moment on, the Mongols were no longer seen as an unstoppable force. Economic and administrative problems further accelerated the decline. While the Mongols excelled at conquest, they struggled to effectively govern settled populations. Their taxation systems were inconsistent. Trade routes became increasingly insecure, and local populations frequently rebelled. In particular, the Yuan dynasty lost the support of its people due to heavy taxation and poor governance, eventually leading to its overthrow. Natural factors also played a role in weakening the empire. Mongol invasion fleets bound for Japan were destroyed by typhoons. Climatic changes negatively impacted their pastoral economy, and epidemics reduced population levels. However, the most decisive factor in their decline was the loss of psychological dominance. The Mongols' greatest weapon was not just their army, but the fear they inspired. Cities often surrendered without resistance, but once this perception was broken, resistance increased. Rebellions spread, and Mongol authority began to erode rapidly. In a system built on fear, once fear disappears, collapse becomes inevitable. In conclusion, the Mongol Empire did not fall because of a single battle. Rather, it was brought down by a combination of overexpansion, internal division, cultural assimilation, and the loss of military superiority. External enemies accelerated the process, but the real collapse came from within. Once the most feared power in the world, the Mongol Empire ultimately crumbled under the weight of its own structure, becoming one of history's largest yet fastest disintegrating superpowers.